In this video, we'll be going over the Sync and Purge settings feature. The Sync and Purge settings work along with the Fin network tree to sync and purge alarms, histories, and snapshots from remote projects available on the local network. So in order for this to work, you must first make sure you have your Fin network set up with at least one remote project that has alarms, snapshots, and/or histories available to sync and/or purge with in your local project. To reach the Sync and Purge settings, start by selecting the App Launcher icon on the top left. Then, select the Settings tile located under the Advanced Apps section to open the Sync and Purge settings view. On the far left of the Sync and Purge view is a menu that contains the different Sync and Purge sections. The first section is the Alarm section. This section will allow you to set up Sync and Purge settings for alarms. For the purpose of these alarm settings, the term sync means importing alarms from the remote project into the local project. When enabled, the alarm sync subscribes to all remote devices, polling for any changes in alarms every 5 seconds. All alarms that match the alarm sync filter will be kept in sync with the remote device acting as the master for the alarm. Okay, so let's go over how the alarm sync and purge settings work. Before I enable anything, I'm going to show you the alarms we currently have in our local project, just to help you get a better visual of what the sync does. So to do this, I'll open my Alarms app, and as you can see, we currently have no alarms in our local project. Now I'm going to go into the DB Builder and make sure that I've brought in the alarmable points that I want to sync into my local equip tree. In this case, Site B, which is a remote site brought into my Fin network, is going to be the site that I'll be syncing alarms from. I verified that the points are in my local database, so now I can go back to the Sync and Purge form and begin setting it up. As far as alarm syncing goes, there are only 2 settings available for us to set up. One is the Enable Sync, which will start the alarm syncing, and the setting below that, which is the Alarm Sync filter. As you may know, when creating alarm logic, you can add unique tags to the alarms. The Alarm Sync filter allows you to filter which alarms are synced based on their tags. So if you only want specifically tagged alarms to be synced, you would type that filter into the Alarm Sync filter section. In this case, I want all of the available alarms to be synced, so I'll leave the filter empty as is. Once you're ready to sync, go ahead and click on the Enable option to enable the sync. When Alarm Sync is enabled, all remote devices will notify the local Fin server when an alarm changes, and those changes will be propagated into the local database with an additional tag referencing the source of the alarm. Additionally, when a synced alarm is acknowledged, it will notify the original device about the acknowledgement, and it gets acknowledged on the remote system as well. Now that we've done alarm syncing, let's take a look at the Alarm Purge settings. The Alarm Purge has 3 options. The first option is the Enable Alarm Purge property, which allows us to enable or disable the automatic alarm purging. The second option is called Run Alarm Purge, which allows you to immediately run an alarm purge independent of whether or not you have the Enable Alarm Purge property enabled. The third option is the Alarm Max Age property. This allows you to determine how old the alarm data has to be for purging. So once the purge is enabled, it will look to see which alarms are above the max age property value to determine what alarms get removed. Keep in mind, all purging only affects alarms that exist on the local project and does not affect the alarm records that exist in the remote project databases. The next Sync and Purge section is the History section. History syncing will sync all haystack and backnet points set up to synchronize their history at the given schedule frequency. The trended points need to exist in the local instance for histories to be synced. So before we enable the history sync, let's look over the available history sync settings. The first setting is the Enable History Sync toggle that enables or disables the automatic syncing process. Below that, we have the Run History Sync setting, which will execute the history sync task immediately using the given parameters. Running the history sync manually will also run independently of the history sync frequency setting below. The third setting is the history sync frequency. This determines how often the history sync will run once the history sync setting is enabled. So now that we've gone over the sync settings, let's see how it works. First, I'm going to go into my database and verify that I have a remote point or points available in my local equip tree that I want to be synced. As you can see here, this point was brought in from my remote project, and its history collection is set to be synchronized. At the moment, you can see that there is no history data on the point. So now that we have that verified, let's go back to our sync and purge setting and enable the history sync feature. Now that it's enabled, we can go back to the local database and refresh the point. Now that it's refreshed, we can see that the history data has been synced from the remote project into our local project. So now let's go back and take a look at the history purge settings. These work similar to the alarm purge settings. The settings basically give the user the ability to enable and disable the automatic history purge. You have the option to run it manually, and down below that you have the history max age setting that determines how old the history has to be before it gets purged. So if we set the value to 1 month, all synced histories will only retain 1 month's worth of history, not including the current month, and the rest will be purged. So for example, let's look at a point that has several months worth of history. Here in my database, you can see that this particular point has histories dating back to March. If I go back now to my history purge setting and enable it, this should purge everything but the month prior. So if we go back to that point and refresh, we can see that histories over 1 month old have been purged by looking at the his start date, which now starts at the first of the last full month. And that's it for the history sync and purge. The last section is the snapshot sync and purge section. This section will allow you to determine the sync and or purge settings for your local and remote project snapshots. Please note that for the purpose of these snapshot settings, the term sync means importing snapshots from the remote project to the local project backups folder. So let's go over the snapshot sync settings first, and then we can go over how it works. The first sync setting we see is the enable snapshot sync setting. Once enabled, this will automatically commence the syncing process, which automatically syncs snapshots from remote devices into your local project within a snapshots folder in the file system. Synced snapshots will appear as remote snapshots in the snapshots tree to help differentiate remote snapshots from your local snapshots. The second setting is the Run Snapshot Sync option, which when clicked on will execute the snapshot sync immediately. The third setting is the sync frequency, which has various options available to help determine how often the automatic snapshot sync will run once enabled. Okay, so let's go over how this works. I'll start off by going to the DB Builder on my local device to display the snapshots that currently exist in my local database. As you can see, I only have a few local snapshots. So now I'll go back and I'll enable the snapshot sync, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to manually run the snapshot sync. When I return to the snapshot tree in the local database, I now have 2 separate sections. One to represent my local snapshot, and one folder that contains all of the remote snapshots that have been synced. Each of the remote snapshots are labeled based on what project they came from. Remote project snapshots can also be converted over to the local snapshots folder if needed. Alright, so now let's go back and look at the snapshot purge settings. As far as snapshot purging goes, there are 4 different settings. The first one is the enable snapshot purge setting, which when enabled will automatically purge the backups in the local database once a day at 12:15 a.m. The next option, which is the Run Snapshot Purge, will execute the purge immediately. The final 2 purge settings are the max local snapshot and max remote snapshot options that determine the number of snapshots to keep for both the local and the remote databases. So from our earlier sync, we brought in several remote snapshots. We can use this as an example of how the purge works. Let's say I only want to keep 2 local snapshots and 3 of each of the individual remote project snapshots. Once I hit the purge, it will go in and purge out the snapshots that are outside of the max limit. Our local now only has 2 snapshots, and our remote projects only have 3 of each project snapshots. And that's basically it for the sync and purge settings. So overall, this is a great feature for syncing and purging alarms, histories, and snapshots across the Fin network. We hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out our documentation pages by visiting docs.finproducts.com for more detailed information on all features related to the Fin software. Thanks for watching.